you have to be careful what you tell Munir. That's the... So thanks very much to the organisers for inviting me. This is my last month at the MRC after 7.5 years. And what I want to emphasise is that the MRC isn't the only funder in stratified medicine, and this has been a team effort at the MRC, and it's depended critically on many people in the audience today who've helped with the peer review, the strategising and so on. And many of you will have seen this slide before and heard me bash on about the triangle. And the example, even though I'm a nephrologist, I choose is chronic myeloid leukemia. Obviously, where we were, first of all, was a characteristic clinical presentation and phenotype. Big spleen, lots of mature myeloid cells in the blood, Philadelphia chromosome discovered 80 years ago. That led to the elucidation of the molecular mechanism, BCR-ABL translocation, which then led to discovery and development of a kinase inhibitor targeted at the mutant kinase, imatinib, which of course has transformed the outlook for these patients. But many of us are interested in diseases where we don't know what the molecular lesion is and where we're currently puzzled by the clinical presentation, and we're using drugs that seem to work in some people and not others. So when the MRC started doing this, obviously it was about the science of precision medicine. It was about getting the right medicine to the right patient in the right dose at the right time and so on. But it's much bigger than that. I hope many of you will have read John Bell's Life Science Industry Strategy, because in it has a very powerful idea which has yet to be picked up and run with. And that's this concept of ultra-early diagnosis. So just going back to CML, let's hypothesize that perhaps we could diagnose patients who are going to develop this 10 years before their white count goes up by detecting free DNA in the blood that has the BCR-ABL translocation. We could then run studies to determine whether imatinib actually prevents the disease. So for me, this isn't just about precision treatment, it's going to be about precision prevention and a whole new approach to medicine where we could use drugs as a secondary preventative in patients where we know they're going to get the disease but they aren't yet sick. So I think this is a very, very powerful and incisive area to be thinking about and working in. Now, over the last 7 or 8 years, the MRC has now populated a new way of doing discovery science in humans. And it's a complicated map. It's a map of 17 stratified medicine programs. I'll take you through some of them. And also an important development for the MRC at least, which has been to invest in centres that develop molecular pathology. The rationale being that we're never going to translate stratified medicine into improved care in the NHS unless the NHS has access to the molecular diagnostics that are needed to stratify. And again, I think that this morning's session will help you appreciate how much of a team effort this has to be. But I think the key thing on this slide is that what's really new about this is that it's a consortium approach. It's not the lone investigator anymore. It's a consortium approach. 36 academic partners involved in these 17 stratified medicine developments and the nodes, 57 companies involved. So this is a new way of doing science. It's a consortium, a collaboration approach. And it isn't place-based. It's expertise-based, and it brings together people from many different cities, hospitals, and practices. And here's a few of the examples, and a number of people are talking in this meeting, but there's a list of some of the consortia that are in the area of autoimmunity. I'd just like to highlight one that I'll come back to. Here are some others. Now, Again, I'll emphasise in a moment that this is a team effort. Cancer Research UK has led on stratified medicine in cancer, but the MRC has a couple of programmes, and again, I'll come back to one of them, which is new and very interesting. Respiratory, infection, talk a bit about that. Gastrointestinal, congenital, mental health, I'll come back to. Cardiovascular, metabolic, renal. So all the major disease areas are covered in these strategic investments from MRC. 75 million now committed to this activity. And the first couple of these were developed very much with industry by Les Borisevich, Boris, when he was chief executive before me, in partnership with the ABPI. So this is from the very start has involved industry and academics working together. Now this is a slightly out-of-date map. It's the sort of thing that the MRC office love to produce for their chief executive. It's to try and imply that there's a really coherent thinking. Often this is just opportunist, but here are our stratified medicine consortia, somewhere between discovery and development. Here are the molecular pathology nodes drifting into regulation. Here are clinical research infrastructures. Together with universities in 2015, we invested 200 million in new clinical infrastructure, particularly imaging infrastructure and genomics infrastructure. And I think that the NIHR now call these MICs, not DECs. But I've never understood the NIHR because I work in Scotland. But nevertheless, what you can see, here's Innovate, Medicines Discovery Catapult. What you can see is that there's been an enormous series of investments in this. And you're going to hear from a number of the organisations that have been crucial in this area of stratified medicine. Now, here's an example of a disease that's completely changed since I qualified in medicine in 1981. I was taught about non-A, non-B hepatitis. The older clinicians in the audience will remember back in the 1970s, all we knew about was type A and type B hepatitis. During my medical career, not only has hepatitis C been discovered, but it's also been cured in a huge majority of patients now thanks to directly acting antiviral agents. And this is the work of Ellie Barnes and her consortium based in Oxford on hepatitis C. What that consortium was able to do was work with Gilead on trials that showed that directly acting antivirals are immensely effective in the vast majority of patients with hepatitis C. But it's also now focused on those patients who don't respond well, either because they have genotype 3 virus or because they have complications like liver fibrosis. So the work is still to be done, but here's a condition where, for the majority of patients, they can now be cured with highly targeted precision medicines. I think Dave Jones is on the schedule later. I can't see Dave yet. So one of these people is George Freeman, and one of them is Dave Jones. It's you pay your money, take your pick. And what they're demonstrating, I think, is the app that the UK Primary Biliary Cholangitis Consortium have put together. And I'm sure that Dave will tell you about the work that the consortium did in getting the first new medicine, obeticholic acid, into this very difficult to treat condition that affects about 20,000 people in the UK. And this is a great example of the power of consortium formation. And this is Professor Lucy Wedderburn at UCL. And the reason I wanted to show this is that this is the first paediatric consortium. And although I'm not a paediatrician, again, many of you in the audience will know that medicines for children is a difficult area. Many medicines that we rely on in adults haven't really been tested properly in children. and we obviously need to work on pediatric conditions like juvenile idiopathic arthritis, which of course is complicated by uveitis and blindness. So I think it's good news that at least one of MRC's consortia will be in the pediatric arena. And I wanted to say a bit about mental health research. This is obviously a Cinderella area, and one of the problems has been to characterize and dissect these vague disorders like anxiety and depression and schizophrenia and so on. And I wanted to show a few slides about this. So the MRC published last year a new mental health research strategy, and an idea within it that really got my attention was the idea that you could stratify by symptom. So here is a group of conditions which currently are put into diagnostic boxes, but many of those boxes actually share symptoms like anxiety and impulsivity and so on. And the hypothesis is that those symptoms actually bespeak involvement of particular circuits in the brain, and that you can stratify these diseases on the basis of symptom. Now, the MRC at the moment is strapped for cash until the next spending review. We haven't been able to pour large amounts of resource into this area, but we've started two small-scale initiatives in mental health that are relevant to today's discussion about stratified medicine. The first is a series of mental health data Pathfinder awards. The idea is that we're working towards creating a data platform for mental health research, and I'll come back to the importance of data platforms later. And also, we're very interested in testing out an approach towards target validation, in particular in the mental health area. Now, again, I think Ruth March is on the schedule, and AstraZeneca have published their data recently that shows that the vast majority of their failures in phase 2 and phase 3 are due to inadequate validation of the target. So again, we're very interested in trying to validate targets in this area of mental health. And of course, we now have a very rich approach to characterizing patients with disorders of mental health, genetics, autoantibodies, imaging, data science, and so on. And I just wanted to highlight one of the MRC's investments in this area, which is the consortium trying to understand treatment-resistant schizophrenia and trying to define patients who will benefit from the last line of defense, clozapine. So this is an important area in which I think there are tremendous opportunities as we understand more about the molecular basis of disorders of mental health. Now, MRC and Innovate, as they go into UKRI, will be jointly responsible for delivery of an industrial strategy challenge. And that challenge is turning health data into early diagnostics and precision treatments. And it has three components. One will be a big investment with companies and charities in developing whole genomic resources, in particular aiming to get whole genome sequence on all 500,000 UK Biobank participants, and also work with GEL to get tumour germline pairs on 25,000 patients with common tumours. And all this data will be available for analysis by stakeholders in a kind of open science mode. There's also going to be a big investment in digital innovation hubs, and I'll talk a bit more about digital innovation and data. And then lastly, there'll be an investment in the artificial intelligence used to analyse digital pathology and digital radiology, and also a strand of investment in new biomedical diagnostics. This is a £210 million programme. It's going to start rolling out later in 2018. Calls will begin pretty soon. It will be run by a challenge director, and that person might be here in the audience, because Innovate are running the process to recruit a challenge director in this very interesting area. And here's an example of the importance of this approach. This is Professor Emberton's work at UCL, one of our new investments this year in early prostate cancer, a disease where there's been overdiagnosis, overtreatment, and failure to stratify patients. And what this brings together very nicely is the use of machine learning to analyse prostate biopsies and also to analyse images, because this group were one of the groups that got state-of-the-art MRI from the MRC 200 million investment in clinical infrastructure. So this illustrates, I think, a whole new approach to precision and stratified medicine, and the importance not just of pharmaceutical and diagnostic companies, but also the importance of informatics and artificial intelligence companies. And here are the partners in that particular consortium, illustrating this point that we're now into thinking about working with the providers of digital radiology, digital pathology equipment. We're working with companies that are interested in image analysis and so on. So again, I think this picks out some of the future directions of travel in this field. Now, lastly, I want to come back to a personal obsession of mine, and that is an objective that I had when I first went to the MRC, which is to try and see the articulation of NHS data with biological data. And the reason I was interested in that is not because this is research I understand or do, it's because I had been the grandiosely titled Chief Scientist Health in NHS Scotland before I went to MRC. And I was amazed by the power of electronic records linkage in Scotland, and in particular in diabetes, where every single patient with diabetes is consented to join a research database that now has 300,000 people on it. It has all their data, every blood test they've ever had, every retinal photograph, every image, every prescription. Many of them have genomics data. It's enormously powerful. And just collecting the data has led to a 40% reduction in amputations and blindness. No new interventions, simply collecting the data and being careful about the management of patients. So data, I think, is enormously powerful in discovery science in humans, and you'll have noticed that every single consortium depends on data linkage. So it's taken us 7 years from the ground, working up, building capacity through investments like the FAR Institute and so forth, working with a whole bunch of other funders, research councils like EPSRC, ESIRC, all for health departments, Wellcome Trust, British Heart Foundation, to set up Health Data Research UK. Now, a little bit over 50 years ago, the MRC became aware of a disruptive technology, molecular biology, and it set up an institute led by a director with dedicated funding in Cambridge. 14 Nobel Prizes later, we can look back and say that was a wise investment in a disruptive technology for investigation of disease, molecular biology. I think that 50 years from now, Health Data Research UK will have a clutch of Nobel Prizes, because this is the same model. Even though it's a distributed institute, it's a director, Andrew Morris, it's a big chunk of money, it's going to be more than £20 million a year, it's a dedicated investment in trying to understand how big data can be used to advance the cause of medical research. It's taken an inclusive approach. It's now designated 6 consortia that will lead on building a data platform for the UK, Wales and Northern Ireland, Scotland, Midlands, Oxford, London, Cambridge, EBI, Sanger. So this is a very important investment, and here are some of the areas in which it will work: modernising public health, thinking about clever ways of doing new trials, working towards actionable health data analytics. But crucially, it's going to be the core, I think, of much precision medicine research and practice in the future. And the reason we need vast amounts of data is, of course, many of the conditions that we're interested in are quite rare. And what this slide attempts to show is the fact that if one were investigating a biomarker that might pick out a rare form of a tumour that is itself uncommon, then it might be possible in some diseases to do that on the UK's database alone. In others, one might have to have the whole of the EU involved. So this is an example of the importance of remaining associated with the Innovative Medicines Initiative and the programs that the EU has, because if we are to develop stratified medicine, we're going to need to look at data sets that are bigger than the UK alone. And I was very interested by Munir's slides emphasising that the UK group is now working internationally and it's getting visits from many different bodies, because to solve some of these problems we are going to need to work at a level which can only be delivered by a transnational approach. And lastly, this slide attempts to demonstrate the size of the problem in terms of the number of data bytes, terabytes, petabytes. I think that's exabytes. Don't ask me what an exabyte is, but it's big. But clearly what we rely on is Moore's law. Our data crunching capacity doubles every couple of years. We rely on that. But the future of this discipline of stratified medicine, I think, increasingly will be applying data science to the phenotype, the genotype, the omic type of the patients that we're interested in. So I'll finish there, Munir, say thank you to everyone in the audience who supported the MRC in stratified medicine, emphasise this is a team effort, other funders are involved, and stop there. Thanks.